welcome to the first forum of the fall quarter. And we're really honored today to have two outstanding guests, different from our program. We have Midge Costanza, who's going to be talking to us to tell us why we should vote for Kerry Edwards. And we have Mark Price, who's going to be talking to us on why we should vote for Bush Cheney. We're going to have a 17-minute presentation by each of our speakers, and then we're going to have a 3-minute rebuttal from each, followed by questions and answers, which will all be taped for later showing on TV. So, Midge Costanza was the first assistant to the president ever in the history of the United States. She was appointed to that position by Jimmy Carter in the Carter administration. Mark Price is a leader in the San Diego, he's chairman of the Alliance of San Diego elected officials, and he's a native son, lives in East County, and we're really honored to have both of them here. I do want to tell you that each one of these people went out of their way to accommodate us for this program, because our first announcement was that we would have Wade Sanders speaking for Kerry, and we would have Mark Weiland speaking for Bush. But they were both gracious enough to accommodate us. So without any further discussion, I'd like to call on Dave Fish, our president.
Thank you, Jack. My task is just simply to say that this is the 31st year of the Institute for Continued Learning, an Osher lifelong learning program here at San Diego, University of California at San Diego. We've been offering this kind of program for 31 years. We're nationally known, and it's our opportunity to serve a community purpose in presenting this today. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to toss a coin. We're going to toss a coin to see who goes first, okay? Just like they do in the big time. Call.
Heads.
Which is your choice? You can go first or second. You have.
I think I'll go second, Mark.
Good choice. Mark Price.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. I got the call last night. I think they worked it out at about 8 o'clock for me to be here. And it was tough because I'm speaking at Notre Dame tomorrow, and I had a flight out at 8:45 this morning to go to Indiana. And so a lot of work was done to try to get me on another flight. So I'm on one at 1:30, and I get to go visit Atlanta on my way to Indiana. So that'll be fun. One of the things that swayed me into going through the extra effort to be here was knowing that Midge Costanza was going to be here. This may sound funny to you coming from a Republican, but maybe I'm a different kind of Republican. Maybe I truly am that compassionate Republican. I respect what Midge has done. I've known her name for a long time, but last night I really got in there and looked up a lot about you, and my respect went way up. And so thank you for all your efforts. Yeah. I believe, and I think you'll agree from what I read, that we're a better country, a better society, a better people when we debate. It's in the debate that we grow. It's in the debate that we learn. It's in the debate that we become stronger. But the debate has to be civil. The debate has to be respectful. The debate has to be open. And the debate has to be honest. And sadly, in today's world, especially in politics, we lose a lot of that. It's not civil anymore. It's not respectful as it should be. And God knows on all sides it's not as honest as it should be. And that's not good. Because when two parties come together to discuss something, if one or both are not coming from a place of honesty, how are you really going to get to a point where you can truly make a difference? And when you're talking at these higher levels of government, you're talking about the lives of human beings. And I think it's incumbent upon people to come to that debate in an honest, civil, respectful, and open manner. And I'm very appreciative for this opportunity to do that. And I did ask if there were rules. And they said, well, the only rule we have is that you're civil and respectful. And so I said, well, this is my kind of place. So that's all that matters to me. We come from different places. I have one set of beliefs, one set of core beliefs, and my beliefs make me believe that the Bush-Cheney ticket is the best ticket for the future of this country. By the same token, I respect the fact that Midge Costanza is going to have a different set of beliefs and a different set of understandings. But you know, it's the coming together and the merging of those beliefs that hopefully we can learn to respect each other a little bit more. I'm one that hopes that the tenor in the election process changes. I hope it gets to a point where we really start having our candidates discuss thoroughly the issues and stop the name calling and the pointing fingers. I don't know about you, but that's my particular hope in this whole process. By the way, I was told that a lot of you, I commented on how many of you have Irish last names, and I was told by a woman over here, well, a lot of you are from New York and from Massachusetts. And I'm in both places a lot. And then a comment was made about Louisiana politics, and it reminded me of a Huey Long comment about, remember Huey Long, governor of Louisiana? He said one time, among other things that he said, when I die, if I die, he says, I want to be buried in Louisiana so I can remain active in politics. With that, let me tell you some of the reasons that I believe that Bush and Cheney are best for the future of this country. And I broke it down into three things. And the first is character. It's character. The second reason is performance, and the third is vision. First, character. The one thing that we know about George Bush is where he stands. Now, that sets well with some people, and it doesn't set well with others. We got people out there who just don't like George Bush because of where he stands. But the fact is, we know where he stands, and he's been faithful to those things he believes in. And that, I think, is what we look for in a leader. Mother Teresa was asked late in life if she felt she'd been successful. And she said, God never asked me to be successful, He asked me to be faithful. We want our leaders to be faithful to what they believe, that which is at their core. We don't have to agree with what's at their core, but we expect them to adhere to those things that they say they're about and those things that they say they're going to do. And I believe that George Bush, over his opponent, has shown a stability of character. The issues that have come up surrounding where John Kerry is today and where he may be tomorrow and where he may be the next day, those, I think, are direct views or as to his character. George Bush, when he stood before the United Nations and he said that we are going to go, I need your support because we have to hold Saddam Hussein accountable. And if he doesn't stand up and if he's not accountable, we're going to do something about it. Well, we should have believed him. We should have believed him, and we shouldn't be surprised that he actually followed through with what he said he was going to do, because that's his nature. That's part of what his character is all about. Somebody who says what he means what he says, and then follows through with it. We have a great American president who said that we're to speak softly but carry a big stick. The problem is, in recent years, we've been speaking loudly, and we've been talking about a stick, but we haven't been willing to show that stick. And George Bush is saying for 12 years, we gave Saddam Hussein resolution after resolution after resolution from the United Nations to get his act together, to comply with the mandates of those resolutions. And he ignored them. He ran off the inspectors time and time and time again. And finally, we gave him one last opportunity to comply, and he didn't. And George Bush said, if you're not going to comply, we are going to show you that big stick that we're carrying. And he went in. A lot of people say that we went in, and George Bush said we went in because of weapons of mass destruction. Go back and listen. We went in there to force Saddam Hussein into compliance. Yes, there was talk of weapons of mass destruction. there was intelligence that said that he had it. That intelligence was seen by both Mr. Kerry, Senator Kerry, and President Bush. They both came to the same conclusion when they saw that evidence, that information, and that is that Saddam Hussein had these weapons of mass destruction, and they went in. We have since found that he doesn't have them. Or if he does have them, he's hidden them pretty well, or he's gotten rid of them. But at this point, it looks like he doesn't have it. But that doesn't change the fact that the reason that the president went in, and again, this goes to character, was because after 12 years of one decision after another to disavow the commitments that he made, that Saddam Hussein made to the United Nations and the international community, it was time to hold him accountable. What good is it? I have a 6-year-old daughter. If I tell her not to do something, and she does it, and I tell her not to do it again, and she does it, and I tell her not to do it again, and she does it, pretty soon after, if I do that for 12 years, she's going to figure I'm never going to hold her accountable. She's going to get away time and time and time again. Saddam Hussein is a vowed enemy of this country. He has said that he wants to see this country destroyed. He is an enemy of this nation. And after 9/11, the mindset in this country has to change. And I believe the character of George Bush is the kind of character we need. Somebody who says what he means what he says, and follows through with it. You don't have to agree with it, with what he actually did, but you have to admit that he did do what he said he was going to do. And I think that that goes to character. One thing that shines in the face of Mr. Kerry's character last night at the debate. He made a comment that which was a reiteration of something he had said previous about this is the wrong war at the wrong time in the wrong place. And he said this is a war we shouldn't be fighting. And then he makes a comment about how our men and women who are dying over there are dying for a just reason or a just cause. I don't remember his exact words. Well, don't you see that to be a little bit contradictory? If it's the wrong war at the wrong time in the wrong place, then how are men and women dying for a just cause? That's a contradiction. And yet that is specifically what he says. The word is a little different. He didn't say just cause, but he said something to that effect. How can we ask our men and women to fight if the commander-in-chief is saying that what you're fighting for is wrong, that what you're risking your life for is wrong? We need a commander-in-chief, now that we're in there, who's going to have the character to stand strong and do the right thing. And right now we're in there, whether we like it or not. I wish we weren't in there. I wish we weren't in there, personally. But we are. And we've got to make the decision. We can't make the same mistake that was made in the Reagan administration. Remember when we went into Afghanistan and Pakistan? We pulled out of there too soon. And whether you like Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan or not, her reign became unstable, and she was toppled from office as a result, in great part, of us pulling out too soon. So we're now in Iraq, and we need a person at the helm, holding the reins, that's going to do the right thing, have the character to stay until the job is done, and at the same time not undermine our great, wonderful men and women who are putting their lives on the line. The second is performance. The second reason I support George Bush is his performance in office. I found it interesting, the two different conventions, and I assume that you saw both of them, and they were remarkably different to me for this reason. The Republican convention talked about 9/11, it talked about the war in Iraq, it talked about President Bush's performance in office, and it talked about his vision. The Democratic convention, and by the way, this is what they said it was about, because this is what they wanted it to be about, was about Senator Kerry's career as a soldier. His hero is in Vietnam, and I don't begrudge him that. I don't care, people on my side are making a big deal and trying to demean him because he spent 4 months there. If somebody spends 10 seconds in harm's way, they deserve all the credit they can get. I worked at a builder's emporium many years ago, and we had a guy rob the place, and I stupidly chased after him. And I went around behind into an apartment complex, and he turned around and he had a gun right cocked in my face. And he said, "You turn around and leave or I'm shooting you." Well, I turned around and I left. But you know, in a small way, that gives me a deep-seated appreciation in that few seconds of what these people go through when they put themselves in harm's way defending this nation. When they defend this nation. I don't begrudge what John Kerry did at all. I think what he did was incredibly heroic to put himself out the way he did. And he deserves credit for that. And I say shame on my members of my party who are talking out against it. When you put yourself in harm's way for the defense of a nation and for to save the lives of others, you're doing the most valiant thing that a human being could possibly do, and I give him credit for that. But look what they focused on at the Democratic Convention. They focused on his time in Vietnam, and then they attacked Bush for the rest of it. There was very little said, if anything, about his 20 years in the United States Senate. You got to ask yourself, maybe scratch your head and say, what is it about those 20 years in the United States Senate that they don't want to talk about? Why didn't they bring that to the forefront? Performance in office in a leadership role, I think, is an important factor in who we should vote in as the commander-in-chief and the president of this nation. And his performance, 20 years in the United States Senate, was ignored for the most part at their convention. You got to ask yourself why. Why? What is it they didn't want us to know? What is it that they didn't want us to hear about? George Bush, on the other hand, talked about his performance. He gave us details of what he's done over the last 4 years as commander-in-chief. To some folks in this room, probably ad nauseum, but he still stood up and said, for better or for worse, this is who I am and this is what I've done. That's performance. What he's done across the board in policies, I just want to mention a couple of the things since he's been in office. He's on the economy. He's built up jobs in the economy. By the way, you hear the other sides talk about there being less jobs. That's because they keep quoting just the private sector jobs. When you bring in the public sector, that's 800,000 more jobs that they don't talk about, 500,000 of which, by the way, were teachers. Homeland security is something that is part of his performance that he did, George Bush and Dick Cheney, bringing in this whole new position. Department. Compassion, removing the barriers that separate the poor from effective services. Healthcare, making healthcare more accessible and affordable. Education. He's got bipartisan education reform. You know, people want to go after George Bush and say he's mean-spirited. But a lot of what he's done, he's been able to get bipartisan support for. He's been a leader. His performance has been good in that area. National security, he has a strategy that meets the challenges of our time, preserving the beauty and quality of our environment. Now, I know there's a lot of environmentalists out there that think that we Republicans don't care about the environment. I think the true environmentalist is the one who uses the land, who rides horses on it, who hikes on it. I moved out to Alpine, California so I could have my horses and I could ride. And I've gone out for weeks at a time, just me and my little Cocker Spaniel dog, on the Pacific Crest Trail, which goes, as you probably know, from Mexico to Canada. Why did I do that? Because I love the environment. And I want to see this environment sustained. I want to see the open spaces remain open spaces. I want to see our sky blue. I want our air cleaned up. By the way, I don't know if you read the recent reports, but due to the work that's been done, San Diego has the cleanest air it's had in 30 years, just for whatever it's worth. One more minute. So the last thing that reason we didn't think we'd go 17. The last reason that I support George Bush, and I hope you will, is I think he has vision for the country. He has vision that I think is in the best interest of this country. He has a vision that separates it. The difference, I think, between the Republicans and the Democrats isn't whether or not we see the problems. We do see the problems, but the difference really comes down to how you solve the problem. The Republican vision and George Bush vision is it's up to the individual. We should assume personal responsibility to make a difference in what's happening in this country. The Democrats, for the most part, say, let's just create another government program. Let's just keep building up the size of government with the number of programs, let government do it. This scares me. And since my time's about up, in the questions and answers, if you want to question me about that, I'll tell you why that scares me. And I thank you for your time and your attention.
That's about as eloquent a speech I've ever heard about the Republicans. I think, Mark, you should be their national spokesman, for sure. And now we're going to hear from Midge Costanza.
Thank you, Mark, very much, and for your kind words. I expected to find Mark Hyland here, and since I'm supporting the person who's running against him, she's here, he isn't. His loss, Karen Underwood, who's running for that Senate seat. You're right, Mark. I've spent an enormous amount of my life in public service. I've gotten involved in politics because I believed the most important part of anyone's life is the contribution you make to the land, to the environment, to the neighborhood, to your family, and to the community. I got involved because of those reasons. And for the first time in the over 50 years that I've been involved in public life, I feel my vote this year is so far-reaching, so important for the history not only of America, but every vote that is cast this time is for the world. It's how we look to the other people in this world, our standing in the world. I am embarrassed by the leadership of this country. I am embarrassed that we torture prisoners and yet we don't take and claim responsibility for it. No one has been fired for doing what they did, not only to those prisoners, but to America. This is my country too. Let's talk about character. Let's talk about a man. 5 books have been written by people who used to work for this administration, who will swear to you, who will prove to you that George Bush was going to go to Iraq whether we needed to or not. And he did it. And I'll tell you what saddens me. Here we are in San Diego, marked the most beautiful city in the whole world. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Rochester, New York. I love living here. I miss the snow a little bit. But during campaign time, these politicians have so many snow jobs, I figure it's as close as I'm ever going to get to snow. You know what I'm saying? So the character issue, I suppose I have to pay for this? Mark.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Mark, but I know your party likes to buy votes. You can't have me. And certainly not for that much. Mark's a great guy, and I love the involvement, whether we agree with each other or not. Government is formed every time there is an election. And like it or not, that's our job. Our job is to vote. That's our responsibility, and if you even want to be coy about it, it's our opportunity. And when you talk about war, why? Why are we in Iraq? When you go to war, you have to have a reason. You have to have a purpose. You have to come out of there so you can measure whether you're winning or losing. Over 12,000 innocent Iraqi civilians killed. Over 12,000 of our young men and women wounded. 1,054 of our young men and women killed. It's easy for me to stand here and talk to you and say, well, you know, when it's time to go to war, we ought to go, because I don't have to go. And I am sick and tired that in the 50 years that I have been involved in public life, old men decide where we fight our wars, and young men and women have to fight them, whether they like it or not. Those young men and women in Iraq right now are not there because they believe in what they're doing, because they had to go, because that's the law, because they're there.
That's a lie.
I'll take any test you want, baby. This is my opinion. You give yours later. Mark said that when his child is told once, twice, 3 times not to do something, if she does it, she gets punished. But he doesn't bomb her. He doesn't invade her. We did. My opinion is we should not be in Iraq. It is the wrong war at the wrong time in the wrong place. Otherwise, be prepared for North Korea based on the exact same reasons, only in this case, it would be true. They do have nuclear weapons. Performance. This president has rolled back 200 environmental regulations. He backed a constitutional amendment to outlaw gay marriages as though every gay man and woman in the country is running to the altar. He pulled out of the Kyoto Agreement of global warming and gutted the Clean Air Act. This is the great environmentalist. He failed to fulfill his pledge to get Osama bin Laden, who is still free, who is the real culprit, who is the real enemy. Tell me, if you can, after this conversation that you and I have, if you can tell me who the enemy is in Iraq. Who's the enemy? Saddam Hussein is out. Who is the enemy? How do we measure whether we win or lose? Tax cuts? If that wasn't a political move, I don't know what is. Our schools are suffering. Leave no child behind. We not only have left children behind, we've left their mothers behind. They can't afford health care. Jobs are not. We've lost millions of jobs. And Mark, I really have to disagree with you definitely on that one. For me, I look at the performance of George Bush and I see more people in poverty. I see more people out of work. I see more people without health care. I see our elderly worried about where Social Security is going. If we can't provide those things for the people of the United States, then what kind of nation are we? The strength of America is not in our bombs, our tanks. It's in us, the people. When we are experiencing a quality of life where we can get up every morning and we know that we can take care of our families, that we know that we can provide health care when they need it, that's the strength of America, not bombing people. About 50 years ago, I decided I'd get involved in public life. I have spent so much of my time trying to create a world, at least help create a world that had peace and justice and personal freedom. because that's what I think America is. That's the America I'm proud of. That's the America I want back. That's the America that this first generation Italian American decided was worth being involved in and living in and working in. I think it comes down to this: choices, choices, choices. On Wednesday, the day after election, do you want a president who has failed in the environment, in jobs, health care, and peace and justice? The Patriot Act is the greatest invasion on the privacy of the people of this country as ever has been put upon us in the history of this nation. Our civil rights. Do you want a president who has failed in all of this? Or do you want a president like John Kerry, who's been 20 years in the Senate? Mark, you are absolutely right. 20 years, and guess what? We're not hiding anything. Does anybody here have an internet? Go into the internet. Look at the record of John Kerry. We didn't hide his record. We're proud of his record, and so is he. Go into the Senate, click on to John Kerry, and you'll see every issue he's ever voted on, every issue he's ever supported. We're not hiding his record. You can't serve 20 years in public life and hide your record. George Bush was the governor of Texas. He rode into the White House, and he became president. He's been there 3.5 years, and every area that I've just talked about, he's failed in. We are not better off today than we were 4 years ago. We are not safer today than we were 4 years ago. We have created more enemies for America and through the terrorist armies that claim lives every day in Iraq. I didn't want to use my whole 17 minutes because I really thought we could talk and answer some of your questions. But I'm also standing here, a person who supports that quality of life that involves the physical well-being of all of our citizens. Stem cell research. I don't know how many of your children are affected or people you know are affected. Stem cell research has become the mantra of George Bush's anti-choice stand. I'm here to tell you that the women in this audience and your grandchildren and your children, if George Bush is reelected, there will be another Supreme Court member appointed, and you will never ever see again the right of a woman to make a choice in her life. And I'm here to tell you, if all my 50 years were boiled up into one little area, it would be as a woman that I do not want the President of the United States, his collaborators in the right wing, his co-conspirators in the Congress, to ever make that decision for any woman in this country. Never. I say shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. I want to end by reading something to you that got me started in the first place. I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, and even though that may make some of you in the audience itch a little bit, it's who I am. It's what I believe in. You don't have to agree with me, as Mark said. That's what America's all about, choices. Choices. And we don't call each other names, sir, because we have that freedom. Because if my right to speak here and differ with you is not validated in this room. Not one life that's ever been given in war to protect that freedom that I am expressing now, that we all come here, that Mark comes here to exercise. All of those wars have been in vain. And while we are trying to guarantee freedom in Iraq, we are losing ours here at home. I can't even begin to tell you how sincerely committed I am in this election, perhaps more than ever before in my life. I worked for a president. I ran his campaign. And would you believe I am more involved and committed in this election this year because of the impact on our lives here at home and our standing in the world. We are too close to foreign countries to be messing around here. This is not a Nintendo game. This is our country. I got started in politics because as a human being, I wanted this human race to survive. I wanted our earth to survive. And I'm so self-centered that I'd even like to help make this a better, fair, more peaceful world, where we use our brains and our strength and our resources to make sure that people have enough to eat, a place to live, a chance to work and learn, to love whomever they want, and to enjoy being alive. I don't need it. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Midge. I'd like to restate, this room of people is meant to be polite, respectful, and decorous. I am embarrassed when a speaker is heckled by someone in our audience that is out of place. And please, please, if you have a comment or a question, you'll have time to ask it. Heckling is absolutely out of order. Thank you.
Hey.
I think
Now we know you're a Democrat.
You got it, baby.
I think with our Osher funding, we can afford the coffee now. I don't know. But we're going to have a 3-minute rebuttal for each speaker. And the speaker who spoke first, Mark Price, will have the first rebuttal of Midge's speech. Thank you.
Just a couple comments. I'll go down my list and I'll try to touch on the different things as quickly as I can. First of all, the idea of us losing our standing in the world. We have 30 nations that are allies to us in our efforts over in Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you know that at the end of World War II there were only 9 nations? The standing in the world, you know, if you have to look at things in their historical context, I think, before we just say we don't have any more standing in the world. Mr. Kerry, Senator Kerry last night said that he thinks there should be a global test to determine whether or not we enter into these conflicts. This nation of ours should not submit ourselves to the whims and the decisions of other nations when it comes to the defense of our country. We should elect people with good character, with vision, who have a history and a track performance to make the decisions necessary to stand up for this nation. As far as the record on Bush, the difference, I think, between Bush and Kerry, you got to go ferret out, as Midge pointed out so eloquently, you have to go ferret out his record, whereas Bush was proud to put it right straight out in front of you, and there's a big difference there. You made a comment about how how do you measure if you win or lose a war? What's the outcome of the war? And 12,000 people wounded or killed, 1,054 of our men and women are killed. There's also been 50 million people liberated. 50 million people have been liberated from the tyranny that existed in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we can scoff that off, but I'll tell you, as somebody who has been trying to get both parties to acknowledge the problem in the Sudan for 7 or 8 years. I've been there 3 times. That is absolute destruction of human life over there. I'm offended that both parties have just now decided that it's something that they're going to look at, and they're still not making any real decisions on what they're going to do other than sending them help. That is ethnic cleansing going on in the Sudan over there. I've been speaking on it for 7 years. We have to be willing to make the hard decisions and go into places for the defense of the defenseless. And that's just something that we are called to do, I believe, as Americans. Stem cell research. Stem cell research has to go forward. However, we do not need embryonic stem cell research, and that's the difference. Staying away, even scientists today are saying that there's enough stem cell, a good stem cell to do research with without going into embryonic stem cell research. You made a comment, old man fights wars. You know, it's always been that way. I mean, old men make the decision, and it's the young men and the women who fight wars. That's historically, that is how it is, and it is wrong, and it is bad. I come from a family, I'm the first male in my family since 1850 to not go to West Point. And why didn't I go to West Point? Because 2 uncles, one a retired general, the other a lieutenant colonel, both West Point grads, came to me during Vietnam and said, "We're asking you not to go in." And I said, "Why?" They said, because a bunch of families like ours are breaking the tradition that have a long-standing tradition because it was our way of protesting the war in Vietnam. Now think about that. These are seasoned military officers. My uncle, the colonel, had half of his leg, most of his life after Vietnam, he had 2 inches of his bone of his leg removed for his fighting. The general who came to me had been held prisoner in the Philippines, put on a prisoner of war, Japanese prisoner of war ship, dove off, was shot at, got back to the island of Mindanao, organized the Philippine regulars, and took back the island. These are not people who hide from war. These are war heroes who said that the war they're waging in Vietnam, they're waging the wrong way, and they said, we want to have a protest. There are ways to make protests. My relatives, I believe, were telling me how to do it the right way. The way John Kerry did it, I believe, undermined the Vietnam War, went directly to lengthening the war, and undermined the service of the great men and women who were risking their lives at that war. Time is up. We'll talk more later. Thank you very much.
Mark, you and I are going to have some trouble if you blame the extension of Vietnam on John Kerry. Because let me tell you, if he has that kind of power, you should be voting for him for president. You know, that's what I call, you know, I teach people how to speak, and that's what I call an extension that goes beyond what I refer to as truth. Now, he didn't extend the war. He was the one who had more to say about the war because he was there. You know, was it somebody who didn't go who was saying that war's wrong? By the way, I want you to know that's when I started getting really active politically. In Rochester, New York, I pointed to a television. You would have been so proud of me, Mark. I said, Richard Nixon, you are, sir. I called him a liar. I said, you're lying. Of course, I never did it again. I was on the front page of the paper with my finger sticking up like this, you know, being a New York Sicilian. It didn't look good. Anyway, my mother was rather embarrassed. But the fact is that, you know, you talk about his performance. John Kerry has served this nation for 20 years. He fought in a war, discovered he didn't agree with it, and came back and said so. Who has a greater right to discuss a war than the person who went there to fight it? You know, Dick Cheney and our president spent all that time protecting their little bippies from going. I mean, you know, they did everything. Dick Cheney, you know, the guy with the nice language, he says, well, when asked, why didn't you go to Vietnam, he said, I had better things to do with my time. Quote, unquote. I had better things to do with my time. Convention. The only person at our convention who spoke out, and I got to tell you, the people watching that convention, including me, I was so disappointed that we weren't aiming at George Bush. The only person who did was Al Sharpton, and I'm going, go Al! Go, yes, it's about time in this convention that we're going after the person that we want to replace. We were being so kind and nice, and to be accused of, think about every person who spoke at the Republican convention. How mean-spirited, how they made fun of John Kerry and his service in Vietnam. No, no, no. No, no, that's not acceptable. Homeland Security? You want to talk about flip-flop? By the way, flip-flop, flip-flop. You know, I'd rather have somebody who stops, thinks, and changes than someone who says, I'm faithful to war, whether we need it or not. I am faithful. I'm going forward. What?
3 minutes ago.
Oh.
Now we are now at the question and answer period, and the questions have to be brief and have to be addressed either to Mark Price or to Midge Costanza.
I'm really addressing the question to both speakers. I was surprised that neither of you really raised the issue that is most important to me in this, and that is the separation of church and state. My strong feelings about the election are because I fear that if Mr. Bush is reelected, that the wall between church and state will in fact go down. And I'd like to hear comments from both of you on that subject.
I didn't mention it, but it's not because it's not important to me. I do not believe that it should ever be mixed, that it should ever one thing affecting the other. As a matter of fact, in some speeches, I've made reference to those people who run all over the country with the Bible in one hand, talking about God and love and things religious, and in the other, they talk about the destruction of the human spirit. And I am absolutely in support of that separation and will do anything and everything to create that separation.
Reminds me, there's a poem, Patty O'Shea went to church every Sunday, but when he died, he went to hell for what he did on Monday. One of the things I like to ask folks, let me do a clarification, by the way. I was accused of saying something that wasn't the truth when I made the comment about Kerry extending the war. That wasn't my quote. That was the North Vietnamese who made that quote. And they made that quote time and time and time again. That's them saying it. That wasn't me saying it. So I didn't give them proper credit. It was the communist North Vietnamese that said he helped to extend it. Your question regarding the separation of church and state. One question I like to ask is, where does that phrase come from? Do you know? Who asked the question? You did?
Constitution. I didn't know. Jefferson.
Where does it come from? Do you know? Who said the Constitution? See, a lot of people think it's the Constitution. That is not in the Constitution. It is nowhere in the Constitution. That comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Church in reaction to a question.
Well, address it to me.
I thought I did. I'm sorry, sir.
Address it to me. The phrase may not be in the Constitution, but the words of the Constitution clearly imply separation of church and state.
Well, that only came by a decision of the Supreme Court after 150 years of asking them. But nonetheless, you asked the question about it. I believe there should be a separation of church and state. I just like it to be made clear as to where it really came from, because there's a lot of folks out there that'll say it's from the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution. It should be kept separate, and I believe that George Bush wants to keep it separate. And he has done, in my mind, very little very little to change what the true meaning of the separation of church and state is. The problem is that that meaning has been morphed over the years. It's been morphed into something more than it actually was even when the Supreme Court accepted the verbiage as something we should stand for in this country.
Again, thanks for coming in the last minute. We certainly appreciate it. Mark, I was sort of amused at your reference to Mother Teresa and then sort of a comparison to George Bush. I mean, I knew Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a friend of mine, and George Bush is no Mother Teresa. But my question, one of the themes of the Republican convention was support the troops. We saw the signs emblazoned all over the convention floor, support the troops. I'm shocked to see now that in many of our reservists and many of our National Guard people who leave their jobs and go overseas to fight in Iraq, their families have no medical support. They have no health care or anything of that sort. My question for you is this: don't you think, or which would you prefer, to give tax cuts to millionaires or to support the troops by giving they and their families health care?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I didn't compare George Bush to Mother Teresa. I too knew Mother Teresa and met, and I agree with you. As much as I'd like to see George Bush wear one of those saris one of these days, just for humor's sake, I have great respect. I've been 29 years in ministry in the Catholic Church and have had many dealings with she and her order, and I have great respect. What I was drawing the comparison was only in her comment about the importance of faithfulness and faithfulness to those things we believe in. And that I think that George Bush has been. He has been faithful. Do I think he has been a Mother Teresa in any stretch of the imagination? The answer is no. With regard to your question, I don't really accept the premise of it, but I'll answer it anyway as to whether I would rather see the wealthy be taxed or money go to the the families of the servicemen to take care of their health and medical needs. The bottom line is that there shouldn't be a question of, are we going to take money from somebody else? The medical and health needs of our servicemen and women is deplorable, and it should be taken care of. We have servicemen and women, their families, who are on welfare. That is unacceptable. That is wrong. These people are risking their lives, and it should be dealt with. And it should be dealt with swiftly, and I don't care who the administration is, it should not have been dragged on as long as it has been. It's wrong.
Thank you.
Do I have a response to that?
I think the question was addressed to Mark.
Oh, I see. So we have no...
Well, that's okay.
I addressed it to Midge, too.
Midge?
Well, you know, we're not talking, I mean, you know, you keep talking, Mark, like you should be voting for John Kerry. You know, the fact of the matter is George Bush is asking the people of this country to give him 4 more years. This whole administration has centered around his action in Iraq. He sends young men and women there, and you're right, it is deplorable. And right here in our own backyard, in Camp Pendleton, they live in rot-gutted housing. This is disgusting. Well, this is the president who will take your life, but won't provide for your family when you go there to fight, for health care, for decent housing conditions. And when these people get back home, they don't have jobs, they don't have the health care. And look, you want to go to the Veterans Hospital? I think it's disgusting the way we treat veterans who have put their lives on the line for the people of this country. I hate war, but I tell you, anyone who goes and fights it, I respect what they do. And when they come back, we need to show them that respect. This president can't have it both ways. He's either president now and stands on his record, or he gets the heck out.
I want to thank both of our guests for showing up on such short notice, and we've really enjoyed this. Mark, I have a question for you. I may be the oldest man in the audience.
Far from it, Al.
And I go back to the days of bipartisanship when you would look at a Republican and you would look at a businessman who respected a dollar. He knew that there were 100 cents to the dollar. And he took good care of his own money, and if he was a politician, of the citizens' money. I have seen a complete collapse of the Republicans that I knew and long respected. The Lodges, the Saltonstalls, the Rockefellers, the Warrens, the Goody Knights. They wouldn't know the Republican Party today. Could you enlighten me? Have the neocons actually taken over completely, and in the next election will they be called fascists?
One last, thank you for that. By the way, my father-in-law is 91. He'll be 92 here in November, and still quick as a whip. And he lectures me on politics all the time and tells me how it used to be. But he sees that the only real chance we have is along the lines of what the Republicans believe. As far as your comment regarding the party changing, yeah, it has changed. You know, but so has the Democratic Party. I mean, look at Zell Miller at the convention when he spoke. He said that the Democratic Party has left him. The Democratic Party is no longer the party that he grew up in, that he knew. And there are many Democrats that way. There are many people who are choosing to vote for Kerry, not because they like Kerry, not because they're enamored with Kerry, not because they buy into his vision, because God knows they haven't heard much of it. They're voting for him because they hate Bush. They dislike Bush. Is that the way to build a party? The leader of the party is made the leader of a party just because they didn't like the other guy or they hated? There was an emotional sense or feeling against the other person? I don't think that's right. I share your feelings with regards to fiscal issues. We have to focus on the fiscal issues. That's the Republican Party that I believe I'm part of, one that is supposed to care about the dollar, the one that is supposed to be fiscally responsible, which is what you're saying. We do have many Republicans in office who are fiscally responsible. We need to get more of them in there, and I tell you what, you have more of a chance getting fiscally responsible people in higher office if you vote Republican than you will if you vote Democrat, in my opinion.
Okay, with that now this is gonna end the videotaping of this session. Thank you. Thank you.